All right, welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm joined once again by David Anderson to preview the Pinstripe Bowl with Rutgers and Miami taking place on Thursday, December 28th at 2:15 at Yankee Stadium. Game's going to be on ESPN. Obviously, a huge game for Rutgers, an opportunity to accomplish their first winning season in 9 years. David, what are some of your initial impressions of this matchup going into Thursday's bowl game?
Sure. So, I think I'll just state for the listeners that I probably watched more Miami games than any other team other than Rutgers the last couple of years. I lived down there for a little bit. I've got my South Beach inline skating T-shirt on, and my son even has a Miami Hurricanes ornament. So I'll be rooting for Rutgers, but it's hard to say what we're going to see from this Miami team because as much as I've watched them in the last couple of years, they're missing a lot of guys. They're missing, I'll just go down the list. They're missing their QB1, QB2, third running back, slot receiver. They're starting center, guard, 3 of their 4 defensive ends, they're starting defensive tackle, 1 linebacker, and their 2 safeties. So that's basically about half their starters and about half the 2 deep overall, I guess, probably more accurate, that will not be playing. So, I guess we'll start with the quarterback. So they've got Ja'Carri Brown, who did not play at all this year. He's a former 4-star prospect. I did see him in action against Pitt last year in the 2022 season. And the comparisons people made of him coming out of high school is that he's a lot like Vince Young in terms of he's really tall, really thin. He throws from kind of like a 3-quarter angle. And because of his athletic ability, he's really a 1 or 2 read quarterback. And so if his first read's open, he'll get that guy the ball. If he gets past the second read, usually he's been coached up in the past to just tuck it and run because he's got the athletic ability to get to the outside. And he's tall, so he has a little bit of bend to kind of turn the corner or use a stiff arm to just avoid a straight-up hit. And so Rutgers is really going to have to contain him. I think that the main thing that they should do is because of his lack of experience and his being turnover prone as to why he didn't play more this season, bringing pressure, even if you're opening up like a big space downfield, is probably a smart idea because he just doesn't have the experience that the other quarterback, especially Tyler Van Dyke, who's transferring, had. So, that's really the main wild card in this matchup. You're facing in a quarterback who is a former 4-star who hasn't played at all this season and was very, very up and very, very down when he did play in 2022.
Yeah, it's a big spot to be in. Obviously, they have that prep time to get him ready, but without having any live reps this year, that is a tall task. You also have the weather to take into effect. Playing down there in Miami, coming up cold weather, he's not going to be used to that. You have Rutgers bolstered in terms of their defense with all of the guys returning and seemingly, going to be pretty motivated as a defense in this game. Other guys to know for Miami in terms of offense, Xavier Restrepo, the receiver. Why don't you talk about him? He had almost 1,000 yards receiving, 74 catches, over 13 yards per catch. He seems like he's the most dangerous threat in the passing game for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, they have a lot of high upside receivers. They're only missing one, which is Colby Young, who was a starter last 2 years. In terms of Restrepo, he just has a knack for getting open, especially against zone coverage. I break down a lot of film, obviously, like people who watch this podcast or listen to the podcast know. I really don't know how this guy gets open all the time. The best thing I could compare to is maybe like a Wayne Krebet when he was playing for the Jets, because Restrepo's not big and he's not that fast. He's fast enough, but he's quick and he can get open. And so Tyler Van Dyke, basically when he had Restrepo on the field with him healthy, was a completely different quarterback because of that. And so teams a lot of times would play zone coverage against the Hurricanes because they are scared of the overall team speed of the receiving unit. But that really just opens up spaces for a guy like Restrepo. I would expect Rutgers to play more man coverage than a lot of other teams have because they're facing an inexperienced quarterback. But if you let Restrepo get open, like he'll find little spaces and he has the quickness to move the chain. So he's one of those guys where he'll get a couple extra yards. If you stop him short of the sticks, he can kind of bend his body, lean forward, things like that. He's definitely a threat, as well as their other receivers like George. The only one I guess that he's not playing is Colby Young. Parrish is good as well. They don't really use their tight ends a whole lot, even though I just laugh every time I think about this. Their starting tight end, which is Cam McCormick. It's his 8th year of college football. He
That's
was the
great.
number one recruited high school tight end in 2015. So he only had 8 catches on the year, I think was the most among their tight ends. So they really don't use their tight ends that much. But, as a passing offense, they've got quick backs they can use, and then they have a lot of speed at receiver, as well as a really good possession receiver in Restrepo.
And the run game, I mean, this was a really good running team during the season. They average, over 5 yards a carry as a team. Parrish averaged 6.5 yards per carry, led them in rushing. Fletcher Jr. averaged 5 yards. They averaged 175 yards as a team per game. How much is that, you think, are they going to rely on that? Obviously, Brown is a rushing threat as well, which you mentioned. Is it going to be similar styles, you think, in terms of both teams trying to control the game on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some people, especially in the Miami community, they believe that the Hurricanes had the best offensive line in the country this year. I don't know about that, especially because of the conference that they played in. But in terms of they're good, that's true. They will be missing, like I said, their 2, I believe, highest rated guys, Cohen, and then the center who they got from UCF, Matt Lee. I believe neither of them is playing. So, but they have a good enough line that there's backups that can play. So I do expect Miami to try to offset their quarterback, lack of experience by just running it a lot. And we'll see if Rutgers can stop that.
Yeah, and I think time of possession obviously is always important. It's what Rutgers wants to do. It's going to be interesting to see which offense takes its first shot in the game in terms of whether it's momentum boost with a turnover. But explosive plays offensively might be pretty limited in this game, aside from a team breaking a long run. That bodes well, I think, for the Rutgers defense because they're pretty good in avoiding that this year. And the Miami defense, as you said, has some holes. Also, in terms of Jacoby George, he's a really good receiver. He actually averages over 15 yards a catch, a little bit more than Restrepo. And then Braden Smith, Brashard Smith. He is their 4th receiver, but also was all ACC as a kick returner and punt returner. Pretty dangerous in the special teams. I guess how much do you think that that's going to weigh in terms of, and the turf on Yankee Stadium we know is pretty bad. Do you think that will help neutralize things a little bit, or see the type of X factor that Rutgers should be worried about in this game?
Well, yeah, I think that Smith, like you said, he's supposedly gonna step in for Colby Young at receiver a little bit in this game because of that speed he's shown on special teams. I do think that if I were coaching Miami, my game plan would be run quarterback option as well as like jet sweeps. Just try to get that speed just going to the perimeter and avoid the big mistakes. And then hope you might get one of those guys open deep, either George or even a running back on like a wheel route or something. I think that if it were me, that would be my game plan with Ja'Cory Brown. And then hopefully once in a while, like he'll see an opportunity to run or the receivers will be wide open. I do think Rutgers has better DBs than a lot of the other ACC teams that they played, which is why I feel as though the right play here is for the Rutgers defense to not necessarily press up, but be in man coverage. I don't know if Brown is accurate enough that I have to really worry about like smoke screens and type of plays like that. Those don't seem like the type that they're going to feel comfortable with him throwing. They might be scared of a pick six, throwing those type of routes. But I definitely expect Smith or some of the other receivers and running backs to be encounters, jet sweeps, all kinds of like crazy motion that they're going to try. I do think that their offensive coordinator this year does understand how to set them up for success. last year they had Gaddis, who's now the offensive coordinator for Maryland. And there were plenty of times in the 2022 season, not just Van Dyke at quarterback, but the entire offense looked like they were just all over the place. So I do think that this year they're going to be leveraging the strength of their offensive line and trying to get these athletes just with low stress touches, like jet sweeps or short, something wide open and easy. So yeah, I do think the turf will help, though I say that. And in the event you have like a very slick surface, sometimes it makes it tougher for the defense to plant their feet. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I think back to that Rutgers West Virginia game, and I think it was like 2011. It was when the snow game,
Oh yeah.
and it's like the defense had no traction, and both teams, I think it was 41-31. It actually got
Yep.
a little better in the second half, but in the first half, nobody could stop anybody because anytime a back or a receiver just got outside, they couldn't tackle them. And so, that was the game Eric LeGrand came with the axe. He like led the team out, right? So
Yep.
there are times in these cold weather games where it actually benefits the offense because the defense is having to react and it's hard to plant your feet.
Right.
I'm not sure how Yankee Stadium is going to play out. I mean, I haven't gone back through all the history of the Pinstripe Bowl to see how the turf behaved. I know Rutgers in that when they played Iowa State, it was fine. And then when they played against Notre Dame, it was like not too much of an issue. So we'll see if we have the same type of, cold weather, but not necessarily slick conditions.
Yeah, it's a great point. The offense knows where it's going. Defense has to react. So how well they're equipped for that. Um, Miami was already an enigma coming into this game, just in terms of their wins and their losses. One score losses against Louisville and at Florida State late in the season. Obviously,
Yeah.
a lot of defections right now, so the roster is very different. Is there any type of comp you could put on them in terms of anyone that Rutgers has played this year, specifically anyone in the Big Ten?
No. I mean, the best, I guess, would be Virginia Tech with drones
Uh-huh.
running a little bit, and especially because it was his first game, he hadn't played.
Yeah.
So
True.
that's
True.
probably the best guess. But I mean, especially on offense, Miami just has more speed than Virginia Tech. I mean, in the Big Ten, like I said, Gaddis, who was their offensive coordinator last year, is now the offensive coordinator at Maryland. But he's got Talia Tagovailoa, which is, I think, why he had more success at Maryland than he did at Miami. I
Yeah.
mean, but in terms of style, no, but also I'm not exactly sure what to expect because, like, their offense with Van Dyke is try to pound teams in the ground and then let them bite on play action or hit those quick, intermediate routes to, Restrepo or George and let them run a little bit after the catch. That was their offense with Van Dyke. Then their backup, Emory Williams, played, and their offense with him was play action, throw downfield because he was a better downfield thrower. But now with Ja'Cory Brown, it's probably going to be field everything off the run, and then maybe you get someone open deep, like when Rutgers played Virginia Tech and they got, that one kind of busted coverage and Felton was able to score that touchdown. Like, I think I would expect a game plan like Virginia Tech had, but I think that they're a better team overall. I'm not sure if Brown is a better quarterback today than Drones is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good points. So a little bit of a loaded question, but if you were a coach, which mentality would you prefer going into this game? Miami, where there's a lot of younger players that have played this year but are going to have bigger roles in this game, so they have an opportunity, versus a veteran team like Rutgers that has all these guys coming back now. We know they're going to be back next year. There's some confidence there and an opportunity to really bring serious momentum into the offseason. Do you think one versus the other favors either team in this situation?
Well, because of first of all, Miami has a lot more talent than Rutgers on their roster, even if they're missing players. I mean, when you look at, their recruiting rankings the last couple of years, when I was talking about on our podcast for those who listened or watched about, the recruiting, Miami is right on the fringe of that like 10 to 15 range in terms of like overall team talent, which again is still closer to where Rutgers is than Miami is to Alabama or,
Sure.
Georgia or something like that. But the reason I have confidence in Rutgers to at least put up a good showing, and I think they probably should be slightly favored, even though they're coming to the game 6-6, is because I do think the Rutgers coaching staff has shown at all their stops that if you give them more time to prepare, whether it be off a bye week, whether it be the first game of a season, whether it be a bowl game during their first tenure or at other places that they've been, that usually has boded well for their teams. And so I think if Rutgers is a little healthier, I think we should see a team closer to what we saw in that season opener against Northwestern in terms of like the energy that they have, the game plan they have. I mean, Northwestern couldn't do anything against Rutgers, and you saw they went on to have a nice 7-5 season. So, I mean, maybe expect just a little bit more fired up Rutgers. I mean, my concern, though, from a tactical standpoint, the biggest concern I have is in Miami's losses this year, the reason they've lost is because the other team could throw the ball. And that's kind of been their MO for the last couple of years, even in a lot of these close losses. I mean, that game against Florida State, just for everyone to be aware, that was the game before Travis got injured. So Florida State was playing with their full squad, and Miami lost, I think it was 27-20 if you just had it pulled up. Something. So it was like roughly something like that.
Yeah.
And so they took a top, at the time, 3 team in the country and lost them by 7. So there's that. But to beat them, you've got to throw the ball some. If you just try to run it right up the gut, like we talked about in other games, eventually you might wear them down. But like we saw even in the Maryland game, it took Rutgers a quarter and a half to get anything going really in that regard. And so I do think you have to pass. Not only do you have to pass, you need to be able to complement your passing game and your run game. When I've seen the Miami defense have struggles over the last couple of years, it's usually because you get them running laterally and they're not sure what's going to happen. I mean, I harp on that game against Pittsburgh, the season finale 2 years ago, because I was there. And Pitt was not nearly as talented of a team. But they had the Miami linebackers and safeties running every which way. And the holes just ended up getting huge for running backs to go through or for wide open lanes for passes. And that's really what you're going to have to do against them, even if they're playing some of their backups, is you got to try to confuse them and get them over pursuing, because they're going to use that speed to get around the edge. And if you run a counter, sometimes it'll bust wide open. And so I do think that there's some opportunity there. And then the fact that they're missing their 2 very, very good safeties is a huge boost for Rutgers, because from a communication standpoint, and if they're forced to play either backup safeties or maybe corners at that position, that makes it even more important that you can kind of confuse them as to where the play is going. And then if you can punch them a few times, then yeah, I think that playing in the colder weather, the emotion Rutgers should have, that if they can get a lead or they can keep it close, I do think they'll wear them out in the end. But to even stay close, they might have to, complete a few passes and have some of those wrinkles that, again, with several weeks to prepare, I think Rutgers will have going into this game.
So that's perfect segue in terms of having that extra preparation. Gavin Wimsatt, quarterback, struggled quite a bit in November. Had a couple moments in the Maryland game, but they obviously fell behind really quickly in that game. I guess how realistic is it to expect in terms of improvement from the Maryland game going into this game for him, having, the practices that he will have under his belt, and also just kind of the mental aspect of it. I mean, Rutgers had Minnesota transfer quarterback in the portal visit last weekend, Ethan Kalakmanis. There could be plenty going on mentally in terms of, being motivated and or distracted for this game. What are you looking out of him in this game? And I guess, how do you think Shiraka is going to approach it, knowing exactly what you just said, that Rutgers is going to have to complete some passes downfield to ultimately win this game?
It's interesting you asked the question, because the sentiment around Miami is that if Ja'Carri Brown plays well, he's going to leave. If he plays poorly, he's going to stay. It's kind of a strange thing. In terms of how that, is it the same situation for someone like Wimsatt? I'm not sure. I mean, I think Shiraka, when he was interviewed about the bowl game, he he somewhat dodged the question about whether Wimsatt's accuracy has caused him to call the offense in a different way. Basically, he said no, but then the way he talked about it kind of indicated that, like, okay, he's playing to his strengths, and we know his strength is not accuracy. So it was kind of a
Yeah.
sort of answer. I think that the key is figuring out over the last couple of weeks what passes that he feels comfortable with, what type of play you feel like he can execute. And with more time to prepare, he should have a better idea of what coverages the defense would be in, especially if they're not going to be having their two basically defensive safeties that are like kind of the leaders of their defense. So I think that Rutgers will be able to find enough plays and feel confident, and Wims that feel confident to execute those plays as needed. And we've seen during the course of the season, when they have had those plays in their pocket, they have worked. I mean, even think to the Penn State game, the passes they did attempt in the first half worked. They just didn't feel comfortable doing more than what they had. And so I think that with the extra time to prepare, there should be more of those type of plays that everybody on the offense feels comfortable with to hit them enough that it will cause the defense to have to back up or at least reconsider biting on the first sign of a run by Monungai, Wimsatt, or whoever's in the backfield. So I think the thing for Wimsatt is maybe you have some in your back pocket for a deep throw that maybe a safety won't rotate over, and you might get a deep shot to a Jaquay Jackson or someone in one-on-one coverage. But I would expect more scheme, that you're going to try to scheme some guys open, especially on a rollout or something like that, where he has a pretty clear field of vision that he's going to be able to throw that ball. I mean, if I were Wimsatt, regardless of whether I plan to stay, plan to go, or I'm not sure, I mean, you got to let it rip in this game. Like, that's what bowl games have become. And all the teams have been winning these last couple of days in their bowl games. That's teams down 14-0, 17-3, and then all of a sudden they turn it loose and they end up winning. And so I feel like his mentality has to be confident. And I don't know if he had all that confidence at the end of the season. Hopefully he's had a few weeks to kind of bring it back. But I do think any decision he makes has to be quick. Run quick, see a read, make the play, don't overthink it. And hopefully that the depleted Miami defense means that they won't be reacting as quick and Rutgers will have success.
Yeah, great points there. I think what will be interesting to see, and you made a good point about, letting it rip and teams really airing it out in these games. Two-part question. What do you think Schiano and Shiraka will do game plan wise with, Miami having Brown at quarterback and his inexperience? Will they play conservative once again and really try to control the game on the ground? Or with the extra preparation and, everyone being a little bit more healthy here, do you think that they will give Wimsatt more opportunities to make plays downfield in the passing game? Do you think they will? And what would you do?
I think they're going to run basically the Penn State game plan, which is try to be very strategic with your passes and not really let it rip like all the way, unless they see something early in the game that like Miami's not ready for something. I mean, Schiano, like we talk about, and Shiraka even mentioned it, that Schiano has usually a pretty good feel of how the game's going to go. Miami's going to play this conservative. I think I see no reason why they will start out the game just trying to, throw deep and bring all kinds of pressure. Like, I think they're going to have confidence in their talent. And you got to remember, Cristobal is in some way a Schiano disciple. So he's going to play a conservative, I think. And, I mean, really the reason they benched Tyler Van Dyke was because of his interceptions, even though he was benched. And pay attention to what I'm about to say, listeners. They benched their quarterback after throwing for 391 yards in a game because he had turnovers. So they're very turnover averse. Like, I mean, I guess the closest would be Evan Simon not playing after he threw for 300 yards against Iowa, but he had some backbreaking turnovers. Like, that's the mindset that their coaching staff wants to have. So I would expect that both teams are going to try to run it, and they're going to try to play it conservative. I think Rutgers is going to do that. But crazy as it's to say, I have more confidence in Wimsatt if you give him 10 passing attempts in the first half, completing, 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 12 than I do in Ja'Cory Brown. And that's probably the first game all season that we've said that. So I think Rutgers is going to be confident in their coach's ability to set their players up for success. And to answer the second part of your question, I do unfortunately think that's the right thing to do. As much as I would love to see a 50 to 45 shootout, even if Rutgers was to come in on the losing end of it, because it's just exciting for fans, I don't really expect that in this game. But what will probably play out is like we saw many times this year. Both teams are going to play conservative. And when one team realizes, hey, the other team is having more success running it than us, then we are going to have to be the one to take the first few risks. I do expect that to happen. Now, hopefully, Rutgers is able to hit on those passing attempts that they do have. Maybe they'll get a few turnovers, and Miami may decide to just roll over and quit because of the players that are on the field. There's no precedent for that because they have played tough in all of their losses, like you said, pretty much. They really have not done that often, but I don't know, with the weather, with the guys who are in there, maybe trying to preserve their future, or maybe they're going to jump in the portal after they get something on tape. Let's say you're the third string linebacker. I don't know. I mean, Miami's a relatively transient program at this point in that regard. So there might be a little bit of I'm in it for me type of thing from them this game upcoming, and I don't expect that from Rutgers.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. How concerned are you the Rutgers defense defending Ja'Cory Brown and his running ability?
It's an interesting question because we did see that it took them a little while to get adjusted to Kyron Drones running the ball. They had no ability to stop Tagovailoa. Like, they got really very little pressure on him. Otherwise, they haven't played many mobile quarterbacks for the
True.
most part. I mean, some of them that they played, for example, like a Drew Aller, he's a decent runner, but like that's not his game. Whereas they haven't really played quarterbacks where it's their game. So, I mean, we don't know. Is Tyrene Powell's probably not playing though, right?
No, he's not playing.
So really, it's going to come down to Jennings and whoever's in that linebacker spot. They're really going to have to do a good job because, we've seen ups and downs from a guy like Shaquan Loyal, who has often been tasked with this kind of containment role, like a lot of times. And I'm not sure if Rutgers has the top end speed that individual players are going to be able to tackle Brown if he gets loose.
Mm-hmm.
That is a concern for me, but I mean, I think that they're going to be able to confuse him enough that he's not even going to know where he's supposed to run, like where the openings are going to be. So that's why I feel like the Rutgers coaching staff is really going to put their defenders in a position to succeed with that. The other possibility is, maybe you play a little bit more nickel. And I mean, I have full confidence in Max Melton. Or is he playing? Do we know?
No, Max Melton's not playing.
Right.
And I should note Powell is not expected to play. I'm pretty sure he's not available until spring. But with Shiano, you never know. But
Right.
I would not expect him to play. But Melton is definitely gone. He's preparing for the draft.
The reason I asked that is because this would be a good game where him or maybe Loyal, if they were both playing, if they were lined up kind of in the slots on either side, this would be the type of game where you can send one or both of them, and they'll probably have a free rush, and both of them have the speed to take Brown down before he gets in, even crosses the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious as to how Rutgers will play it, if they'll just kind of use Rogers and longer beam then and just stick with the 3 safety look, or if they're going to go some nickel to try to get nickel with a corner, I should say, rather than big nickel with 3 safeties. I'm interested to see how they play that. It's also a big question for Toure because obviously he has the speed, but if you need him to be in more of like a spy role, like I'm not sure if that's really his best usage of his skills. So yeah, there's definitely a risk there. But again, I think the Rutgers coaching staff they've proven time and time again that with preparation, they can slow down a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. Good points. And, where I think it's so important, and I was talking about this last week in terms of how important I think it is, for the pro. They have real momentum on the recruiting trail right now, right? Going into 25, they accomplished their goal of getting to a bowl game. but you have a real chance here to, check another box by getting the first winning season in 9 years. You have all these guys coming back. They all, want to make a statement next year. And the best way to do that is to do it on Thursday, winning this game, really jumpstarting your off season. And I just think that it wouldn't be the end of the world if they don't do it, but it certainly would be deflating. And I think that, you hope that they're galvanized by the fact that all these guys are coming back. And at the end of the day, 3 years from now, no one's going to remember that Miami had a depleted roster.
Right.
You're just
Exactly.
going to remember that Rutgers beat Miami, which I think is important perception wise, in beating those other Big East teams, beating an ACC team, beating a team that you've never had success against. I just think it would really bolster things in a positive way. I guess, how much do you agree with that? And do you think that changes strategy at all, mentality, or do you think it's just, the whole 1-0 mentality? I mean, you have to imagine Shiano sees the big picture and sees the importance in what this game could mean.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what you're saying, this game means a lot more to Rutgers than it does to Miami.
Agreed.
Absolutely true. I mean, especially with Florida State having an odd kind of day with, their signing day. The Gators had an awful day. So if you're talking about the big three Florida programs, the Gators had a terrible day in terms of signing day and what they expected and what ended up happening. So, I mean, I think Miami they're going to probably play it free and easy, except for the fact that their coaches are going to try to pull in the reins on offense. I think from a perception standpoint, Rutgers has to, in my opinion, they have to go to a bowl game at least every 3 years, at least. Really every other year. But you have to
Yeah.
assume there's going to be years where you have bad health, maybe the schedule is tough, maybe, you have a key injury, something like that. But when you go, we're in a state now where we really need them to win this bowl game because of that perception. Because if they lose, outsiders are not going to think about it like you said. Outsiders are going to not for 5 minutes. They're going to be like, "Oh, Miami had half their team and they won." Like whatever. But like from an insider standpoint, I don't want the confidence and swag that this team is going to try to bring into the offseason being hampered by the fact that, like, hey, we lost to a third string quarterback, even though we had everybody.
Right.
Like, we had everybody for the most part, other than, maybe Melton and Powell. And we lost to an ACC team, which is now a little brother conference, even though, again, Miami's been the big brother to Rutgers forever in that sense. But, like, we lost to a little brother conference with half of their offense. Like, that's not – I think Rutgers has some mentally tough guys, and Shannon really harped on that when he was talking about the players they're bringing in. But that's got to damage your confidence a little bit for that to happen. So I really do think that winning this game is going to mean a lot to Rutgers, and it is pretty important to the overall trajectory. So do I think that, where is that going to manifest itself? Well, we haven't talked about special teams. Miami has a very fast returner in Smith, that's for sure. They have Borregalis, the younger brother, who's their kicker, Andres, and he's kind of hit or miss. He's very talented, but sometimes he misses kicks. I mean, there's definitely an opportunity to kind of stamp with its special teams and the defense that, like, hey, this is a legit team. But I do, as a fan, have some of that, scared feeling, like if they lose, especially if it's in like a bet, like again, if they lose 50-40 or whatever, like people are going to go and be like, you're not going to remember. But like, if they really have a game like they had against Maryland, where they really never had a chance, it's not going to feel good. I don't think that will happen, but if it hypothetically did, that's going to leave a really bad taste in their mouth. Whereas I think they're going to be more motivated by a win than a loss. Sometimes a loss motivates you to change and like try harder, but I feel like a win in this case would be a nice ride into the next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the order of the schedule has something to do with it, but ending a season in which you started 6-2 and you lose the last 5 games, that,
Right.
it is obviously, it takes some luster off of the accomplishment of getting those 6 wins and making a bowl game. In addition to the fact that, it is a golden opportunity for this team to get some much needed momentum going into the offseason. And I think that, it would, I think deflating is the right word. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but, you have a lot of positive forward momentum right now with all the guys that are coming back. And again, the other thing, to not to raise a red flag, but, all these guys are coming back. We're also only through the first wave of the transfer portal. You have
Right.
pretty much two more waves coming. Rutgers still needs to add to that roster. So a win is also going to be easier to sell the program in the transfer portal in addition to 2025, plus within the fan base. Having that, checking that box with the winning season, there's just a lot of good that can come from it. A loss doesn't mean there's a lot of bad that comes with it, but I think just feeling wise, attitude wise, from within the program, from the fan base, it would be kind of very disappointing to see that. And again, I think it also, like you said, it matters how they win, or it would matter how they lost too. If it was non-competitive, that would certainly be discouraging. And I think for a defense that has high hopes to be a top 10 defense next year, this is a chance to make a statement and, dominate in the way in which they did against Northwestern, like they did against Virginia Tech, like they did against Indiana, which even a team that showed signs of life later on in the season. Rutgers has shown an ability against a team that's just average or below in terms of personnel. And I know they have some talent on the offense, but they have a lot of holes to fill as well. This is an opportunity for them to exert their dominance and show their potential to springboard into next year.
Yeah. I mean, Miami played against Boston College late in the year and they destroyed them. And
Right.
so, that's not, they're missing some of the players, but Rutgers played Boston College last year and they beat them by 1. Now, I think this Rutgers team is better this year, but we can't fool ourselves into thinking that Miami's not a very talented team. But I agree with you that, kind of like we were talking about in a previous episode, like if your team finishes 500 and you have, quote, everybody back, it's like, is that good or bad? Like this, it might be good in terms of retaining your starters. They know, like, hey, I've got playing time. But if you're a second string or third string player and you're like, okay, everybody's back, and if you're on a winning team, you're like, okay, you're more likely to stay than if you feel like you got that bad taste in your mouth. Maybe now you have negative recruiting. And I know that you're not allowed to talk to for tampering purposes, but that there's going to be guys on the Rutgers team that, especially some of these defensive linemen that aren't getting a lot of reps because they have a lot of depth there, that they're going to be hearing from their friends and all this about other teams that may be showing interest. And it's a lot easier to sell yourself in your mind that, like, hey, we just beat Miami, right? Like, and it's
Right.
a team that we had not done as a program. I'm not sure how much Shannon plays that type of thing because, again, we care a lot more about these old Big East foes that, took our lunch a zillion times than the current players do for the
They
most
were
part.
babies. They were
Right.
babies.
But like, for yourself as a player, like, you want to be on a winning team, and you're more likely to be able to kind of keep those voices out if you're like, hey, we're building something here, we're going places. Then we finished our season on a 5-game losing streak, and so I this is one of those times where I do trust Shiano to come in with a good game plan as well on both sides of the ball, and they should be ready. But there are plenty of scenarios where this game could get away from them just because, again, Miami's got a good offensive line. And if they can control the line of scrimmage, even missing pieces on that offensive line, like it could be a dogfight. And once that happens, you a turnover here and there, and the game could kind of get away from either team.
Yep. Yeah, I think, it's obviously always important to start the game well, but I think in this case, Rutgers really needs to have some good happen in that first quarter to get some momentum. They've always played better as front runners when they have the lead. And I think, we know they have their challenges in terms of having to come back from multiple scores. And this is certainly, it's going to be interesting too how the teams handle it, just in terms of having that extended break, not playing in a game in over a month. Who's going to, make critical mistakes with penalties early on. The timing's going to be off. We know with Miami, they have guys playing more snaps than usual. Does that impact the second half? Do they start to wear down a little bit, especially in the cold weather? I think it's a fascinating game. It's a fascinating matchup. Anything else you want to cover in regards to this matchup, Rutgers-Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl?
I guess just one other player to watch we haven't talked about for Miami. They have Francisco Maigoa, who's a linebacker, who said he's coming back. I fully expect him to play. He's kind of like your Toure. Like, he can be all over the place. As he makes interceptions, he sacks people, tackles for loss. Like, that's the type of guy that I wouldn't say he's quite Kasim Green level, but sometimes in these bowl games, you see like a defensive player just kind of be the guy and just kind of exert their dominance, like we saw Green do when Rutgers was in the Pinstripe Bowl against Iowa State. He actually did the same thing against Virginia Tech. It's just that game was a disaster. But I think with so much uncertainty, this is an opportunity for the stars on either team to shine. And so maybe that's Monangai, maybe that's maybe it's Shaquay Jackson. Like, I mean, if maybe he's fully healthy, maybe they got some plays in the back pocket for him. I mean, this is a time to kind of have a signature moment if you're one of those star players that can really be good for your brand and your team's brand when that happens. He's the main one I would be concerned of having that kind of signature moment from the Miami side. Overall, like I said, like, fans need to just remember it's just one game, but it's definitely going to feel a lot better for the next 9 months if Rutgers is doing this coming off of a win. And I do think that it matters, right now. We talk about other bowl games like the International Bowl when Rutgers played against Ball State. The game really didn't mean that much, to be honest. Like, that really had very little impact in either direction for Rutgers in that game. Whereas, like, when they've had other bowl games like that one against Iowa State after a year of not having been to a bowl game, or even the Quick Lane Bowl because they had lost 2 straight bowl games. Like, winning does make a difference, and in certain times in these bowl games. And so I'm excited for it. Obviously, I'm not going to be at the game. I kind of said I would go to any bowl game other than the Pinstripe, but I don't really want to sit there in the cold weather. I'll be watching from the comfort of my own home. So hopefully fans are willing to go. If I didn't have 2 small kids, I'd make it out there. But, hopefully Rutgers gets a good crowd. Hopefully it's a fun environment. I know they got a lot of activities set up at some of the local bars. Remember that you really can't tailgate in the parking lot legally, from my recollection of, going to the stadium. So, be safe, have fun, and, hopefully Rutgers can ride this wave into, another exciting offseason for the program.
Absolutely. Well said. And totally agree on that. I think it's just really, really important for the stage, going into year 5 of Shiano, getting what you got in year 4. If you can check another box by getting that winning season, it just really helps increase expectations, which is a good thing. But I think also not just outside the program, within the program. And it gives the staff a real selling point of continued buy-in and continued growth in terms of what this team can be next season. David Anderson, thanks for your insight as always. And thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful.
Good night.